So this is Mary Muñoz. I was just giving a background of Ziegler and Ziegler's incredible value and importance to us as an organization, and Mary and her team in particular that are our partners in figuring stuff out, whether we're doing something in the debt market or whether or not we're just trying to understand our business. So, I've caught you on the run, Mary, but I was just explaining this is the FDSA. This is the first FDAS, first day after Sarah. So hopefully we're on a good track here. Anyway, Mary, all yours.
Are there tears?
There are. We like to.
We need cake to make ourselves feel better, maybe? Sugar? Hi everyone, I'm so sorry to be a couple minutes late. It all started with coffee being spilled all over the front of my shirt at breakfast, trying to figure out if I had time to change, lots of traffic. Anyway, very happy to be here with you today. I had a really good time presenting to the board yesterday and talking about trends. And I'm happy to make this as interactive as we can. If you have questions as I go along, wave the flag, I'll stop, we'll chat about it. I just want you to take away as much value from this as you can. I know as residents you don't always get to go out to all the conferences and hear about all the trends and that kind of thing. So we like to bring it back in-house to you whenever we can, and always appreciate invitations like this. So what I'm going to talk about today, and here's my contact information, so if you have something that comes up later and you want to email me a question, Mike can get you that info. What I'll talk about today are four big areas that we're focusing a lot on right now. One is growth, and we define growth really broadly. So growth can be expanding an existing campus like you have, it can be changing levels of care, it can be repurposing a skilled nursing unit to high acuity assisted living like you did here. It can be building a whole new campus on a whole new site. It can be joint venturing with somebody else, lots of different things. So we'll talk about all those trends. I think without fail, my clients all are feeling like the biggest challenge they have today is the labor shortage. So we'll talk about that. What's working, what's not, maybe a couple tips that we're running across. Healthcare. The healthcare environment's changing a lot. You don't have skilled nursing on campus, but yet you still have needs for healthcare. So let's talk a little bit about that environment. And then finally, technology, which is changing the landscape quite a bit, and some cool and fun things are happening out there, and I think that we're going to start seeing more and more changes in how these communities are built with things like smart homes and so forth. So those are the four areas. Any other burning issues on your mind that aren't covered there? Okay. All right, so let's talk about growth. Everybody's probably heard the term silver tsunami. We got this huge wave of seniors coming, and the number of folks over 65, over 75 is going to double by 2030. We know there will be way more consumers out there. And that's you, the consumers of the product that we're building in senior living. We are right now serving about 10% of seniors in the CCRC business, and I can't help calling it CCRCs even though it's life plan communities now, so forgive me if I keep using the old word, but we only serve about 10% of people. So that's not really by most measures very good market share, right? If you were Amazon and you only had 10% market share, you'd say we're a failure. But we rock along pretty well at 10% market share, so with the doubling of the population, you could say we're going to need double the capacity that we have today out there. Or even if we have a bunch of baby boomers who have no money and have no planning for retirement, and our market share shrinks all the way to 5%, we're still going to be full in the capacity that we have today. So I think that's a good feeling to have as a resident as you look at the future financial stability of this product and of this community. Well, the West Coast is accelerating, and Washington is accelerating in the aging of the population. And one of the things that we see with that is an increased incidence of dementia. We're living longer, and the research says that if you reach the age of 85, 50% of us are going to have some form of dementia, which is kind of a sobering thought. But tells us something that we need to be planning for and preparing for in our communities. We're not seeing very many new locations among not-for-profits, so this entrance fee CCRC model is 80% owned by nonprofits. The rental models are mostly owned by for-profits. So among our not-for-profits, we see very little new growth, and in the West Coast, even less new growth, which is kind of interesting. I'll talk about some of the reasons for that. We have a lot of regulatory restrictions in some of our states in the country. California is one in the West, but Maryland, Florida, New York, highly regulated states, and that can be stifling to new growth and new construction. We have a labor shortage for operations. We also have a labor shortage for construction. I'll show you some of the statistics on that. And we have a real consolidation wave happening in our industry. I'll talk a little bit more about that. So touching first on the changing consumer, we have a more and more sophisticated consumer as our market penetration in the industry has gotten deeper in certain areas. So Seattle, for example, had Skyline, had Mirabella, had a couple of for-profits. There's been some meaningful growth here. Wesley Homes has added some new communities. So since I started 20 years ago, Seattle became an attractive place to grow and build new product, and that has educated more of the population of seniors around. So we have a more educated population of folks looking for transparency of pricing, transparency of benefits, help in really understanding whether you qualify and this is the right place for you to go. As we look at the baby boomers coming up, branding and image we think are more and more important. We want to be a sexy business that people want to come to. Have any of you heard about the Jimmy Buffett Margaritaville concept that's out there? So there's a 55 plus active adult concept that Jimmy Buffett's has been part of coming up with and has licensed the name Margaritaville too. So when I posted that on my Facebook page, all my cousins said, "Mayor, Cousin Mary, we need to all go to Margaritaville and hang out together and drink margaritas." So I thought it was pretty funny that all my southern cousins were all over that idea. So we'll see. But branding like that is something that gets people excited about moving in, and maybe even excited about moving in a little bit earlier. I'm working on a project in Sonoma in the wine country with the San Francisco Zen Center and the Kendall Corporation that will have some place for retired Zen Buddhist teachers. We'll have a Zendo, they're going to have organic food, farm-to-table foods, and so there's some cool things on the thematic side that may be happening as we look more and more at the future and how to brand and image these communities. 13.5% of the West Coast's population is over 65. That's a little bit more than in the rest of the country overall. So we have a little bit older population out here in the West. In Washington, we don't have as much growth in the number of seniors over the 65, but we are having an aging of the population. So while there aren't as many new folks coming in, only about 6% growth versus 14% in the country at large, we are seeing the average age increasing in Washington, and the incidence of Alzheimer's dementia in Washington is growing faster than the national average. So 27% growth versus about 22% growth in the nation at large. That just gives you a little bit of a flavor for your state. I live in Arizona, and the growth rate is 43% there. So we definitely have a retirement destination there in the desert and the sun cities and so forth. New entrant species, CRCs, you can see prior to the recession, we were seeing about 8 to 10 new communities a year coming online, and since the recession it's been more like 1 to 4. I only know of one new community, not-for-profit community on the West Coast, and that's the Enso Village, the Zen project that I mentioned. There's another one under construction in San Francisco that will be opening in the next year. Otherwise, we're really looking at expansions and not much risk-taking to do new development out there because people got concerned about the ability to fill up new product. And I think up here, when Skyline and Mirabella both opened during the recession, and it took a while for them to fill up, your new tower outperformed both of those by a mile in filling up fast. So some of that fear we're starting to shake off, but I think there's still a lot of concern that growth might not be supportable when in fact we see communities, new communities selling very, very fast. The Zen project got 700 $1,000 deposits in less than a month. So that's pretty huge, and over 500 in the first 2 weeks. When we finance new communities, one of the things that's characteristic of our not-for-profits is generally everything is debt financed, right? Because you don't have the ability as a nonprofit to go out and issue equity to the public markets and have shareholders invest capital in you and get a return on that. So it's either debt financed or it's financed from contributions, fundraising, or from operating cash that's been accumulated within the organization. So one of the ways that we track new projects is by looking at these seed capital financings or bond anticipation note financings, which is one of the ways that we can fund the startup cost of a new community to buy land. And you can see that Texas and Florida have had the vast majority of new growth happening, with a little bit in California, not much.
Can you explain
elsewhere.
that a little bit more?
Sure. So since a number of our communities, it's harder to fundraise to go buy land to build a new community, more so than it is to invest in either the residents or the existing property. So we've developed a debt product that will help organizations finance the cost of maybe buying land, getting it zoned and entitled, getting through the pre-sale marketing process before it's ready for a bond financing. It's got to have all that done before we can actually issue bonds to the market for construction. So we call that product a bond anticipation note, and it's issued in anticipation of a future financing. Those are 10, 11, 12% debt that might be outstanding for 2 to 5 years and then gets paid out with the permanent financing on the project. And we have a small handful of investors who've gotten comfortable working together on those and establishing all of the benchmarks to have that money drawn. The interest accumulates in the debt, so you might issue 10 million, pay back 12 at the end, but you don't have to make payments through the process while you're trying to get your land entitled.
And 12 to 15% refers to the interest?
The interest rate will be 10 to 12 usually in this market, but they have been as high as 15 to 16%. The permanent debt that then will take those out would be in today's market more like 5.5%, 6%. Yes, sir.
Are they kind of like director or control for either population or likelihood, like Arizona is a big retirement state, Florida is a big retirement South.
Right.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Can you repeat the question?
Okay, so the question is, Texas has Florida.
It would seem to me you would need to correct, though, or if they aren't, to control for differences in population. So the state of Florida, California, has like, 30 million people, and we have 5. So we can't expect the same rate of activity.
That's right. No, I agree with you on that.
So are those numbers, and then in addition to that, certain states have a natural attractiveness to people like us, like Arizona, Florida, especially, and California. So when you do that, do you build in some kind of correction for like a per capita or something like that to so it's clearer?
So these are just gross numbers of projects that are happening in those markets. But when we do a new project, we absolutely look at market penetration rates, how much of the age and income qualified market in that primary area has to be captured to fill up that project and all the other competitors around it, and whether that's an acceptable penetration rate. But this is just showing you in gross numbers how many projects got done where in the country.
Thank you.
And when you say we do a project, you're talking about Ziegler? Are you doing the financing?
Actually, on the startup new community side, we do about 90% of it around the country. But I'm speaking in generalities of everyone in our industry doing new projects. That market penetration is super important, and there are standards that every firm looks at in establishing the viability of a new project. So while the not-for-profit space has been pretty slow growing and the CCRC part of the industry has been pretty slow growing, the for-profits have been going gangbusters. So this graph on the left shows you independent living, assisted living, memory care, and CCRCs, but it does not include skilled nursing. And this big blue line on the top is the pace of growth in number of units that have been built by for-profits. And that little yellow-green line on the bottom shows you the number of new units being built by not-for-profits. Pretty flat. On the right side, I think is even more interesting. The bar graph on the left is for-profits, and that big green space represents new community, new location development. The yellow part at the bottom represents expansions, like your new tower, an expansion on an existing community. And you can see the not-for-profits on the right are doing mostly expansions, very little in the way of new locations. So that means, as a component of the industry, the not-for-profits are getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller as a share of the senior living space in general. This is a look at the total inventory of communities in existence. For-profit, that yellow-green, not-for-profit, that blue at the bottom, and you can see there in a different way the growth in the for-profit side, which has been much more robust. But the not-for-profit occupancy is actually hanging in there much better than the for-profit. So what does that mean? I think it's a couple things. The not-for-profits are entrance fee. We don't see as many people move in and out of entrance fee projects as we do rentals. The for-profit space being dominated more by either independent living with assisted and memory care or just assisted living and memory care. And some of those markets have gotten saturated and they're needing to kind of hold back on growth and have time for that capacity to get absorbed. That's why we see the growth in number of units on the for-profit side starting to dip down. They're starting to hang back and wait a little bit for better absorption in their markets and getting those occupancies back up to the 90s before they continue to do quite as much expansion. Some of the barriers to growth that we see, it's hard to find land, especially in an urban area like Seattle. It's expensive to get land. The construction costs are high, so it's tough to get feasibility. The markets are more competitive. We have NIMBYs. Who knows what a NIMBY is? Not in my backyard. We got a lot of those out there, and cities that are growth averse and don't want any kind of product, even though we think senior living is pretty neighborhood friendly in a lot of ways. Fewer cars, a little bit less traffic, that type of thing. Access to capital today in the tax-exempt bond markets that you would access is incredibly strong. Interest rates are very, very low. But some of the other growth in our industry, affordable housing programs and things like that, the funding has really cut back a lot. The HUD program, some of the state and local redevelopment agencies have closed, and so there's less capital and less equity to launch new projects in the not-for-profit space for sure. And then regulation has increased in some states, and that has been a detriment. Now there's some folks like Hyatt, or now V it's called, who loves developing in high barrier to entry states like California. And the CEO of the Mather companies in Chicago used to work for Hyatt, and she says, I would love to grow in California. It's so regulated, not many people are going to come in. I know how to operate in California, so I'd like to get in there and create a new community. So, you know, we kind of get both perspectives, but I would say in general, regulation has been has had a dampening effect on new growth. And then with Medicare and Medicaid and all the pressures in healthcare, which I'll talk about in just a little bit, profitability has been under some pressure as well. I mentioned earlier consolidation, so this might interest you. When I started 20 years ago at Ziegler in the late 90s, about 25% of the communities like yours around the country were part of a multi-site system, like Transforming Age, if you know them here, or Wesley Homes, owning multiple locations. Today, about 65% of communities are part of a multi-site system. So that tells you how much consolidation we have had around the country in our industry. This gives you a look at those transactions. We call them sponsorship transitions because in the nonprofit space, it's really a nonprofit sponsor, not for-profit sponsor saying, we'll come in and be your new sponsor, and not we're going to value you at $50 million and we're going to give you $50 million for your community. We'll come over and be your sponsor. We'll have you join our family. Here's what we can offer you, and maybe there's a little bit of capital, but maybe there's none. So there have been about 450 transactions since 2010, representing about 650 communities. So when you think about the fact that we have only about 2,000 retirement communities in the country, that's over a quarter of them that have been involved in some sort of a change in sponsorship just in the last 8.5 years. In the beginning of this activity, yes? So, why are they combining? So I'm getting to that right now. Initially, we had communities that were struggling financially, putting up their hands and saying, we need help, we need a strong partner to come in and rescue us, or whatever it might be. Or we've had our leadership has retired and is gone. We really need help, come and help us out. What we're seeing today is more strong to strong. So two strong organizations, even two multi-site system organizations coming together to create one even larger system to bring various kinds of efficiencies, such that I'm about to go over. About 54% of the transactions that you saw represent dispositions of assets to the for-profit sector too. So that is something that makes me kind of sad, because I think not-for-profits really have it all going on, and obviously you believe in that or you wouldn't be here, living here, but that is kind of a sad part of the equation here. So what's driving these combinations of organizations together? Well, back in the 90s, when we began to see some of this activity, financial pressure was really the biggest one. We had organizations, as I said, in trouble, or they were out of capital and they needed to reinvest in their communities. They hadn't kept up with the times, and this is really important. You know, it's not always easy as a resident to say, why do we need to have a new dining room or put in a new pool or do a fancy fitness area? I'm not going to use it. Why do we need to spend that money? But the fact is that the community has to be ready for the next generation of residents who are coming in and the next one after that. And that's what's protecting your entrance fee refund and your long-term viability and your ability to age in place here and live here for the rest of your life with a beautiful campus around you and other people coming in to help keep the financial strength of the community going. So a lot of folks lost sight of that, especially in the 80s and 90s, before our industry really gained some of the sophistication that it has today. As we moved into the 2000s, we started to see more leadership turnover, loss of CEOs, and that's been a constant thread. Almost all the transactions that we see have a retiring CEO on at least one of the sides, and we just don't have the leadership and the people coming into our industry to fill those gaps. So you're very lucky that you had Mike here who could step into Sarah's shoes, because it is a tough time to be out searching for C-suite leadership. We started to have technology become more of a force, and it costs money to put technology in place and to maintain technology. Access to capital became more competitive, and as organizations get larger, they get more diversified. The more different locations you have, the more geographies you're in, the less vulnerable you are to one housing market getting crunched at one point in time. So that risk reduction brings more capital, higher credit ratings, more ability to do the things that you need to do. We also started seeing more competition. So the highest penetrated market in the country is Pennsylvania, which has about 25%, 30% market penetration. So about 25 to 30% of seniors in Pennsylvania live in a CCRC. In most of our markets, it's 5 to 10. And we look for a capture rate if we're doing a new project, going back to that market defensible. We want to be able to say to a bond investor, you know what, to fill up this new Horizon House number 2 and to fill up all the vacant capacity in the market, we don't want to have to capture more than 10% of the age and income qualified people out there. And if we can say that, if crunch all the numbers and 10% or less is going to get us there, we feel pretty confident that that's achievable. If it's 25%, that tells us this is the wrong place to put a project. This market is oversaturated. But in Pennsylvania, that number could be 35% because CCRCs really started over there. There's huge market acceptance of the product there. So all of that is to say, as markets have gotten more competitive, that's been a genesis of transactions like this. And then the hospital industry, which if you had a bell curve, you know, your typical bell curve from your side, we're going to go up this way, hospitals might be way over here on the bell curve in terms of maturity, but senior living is still kind of over here, just now hitting its peak, and was a pretty unsophisticated mom and pop kind of industry not 30 years ago, 25 years ago. So hospital consolidating has led to hospitals divesting their senior living assets and saying, this is not a business we want to be in. Or in the case of Sanford Health and Good Samaritan, that hospital system said, hey, Good Sam is the biggest nursing home provider in the country. We need to get smarter in post-acute. Hospital consolidation is putting pressure on us. We're going to combine with senior living. But I would say the majority of hospitals have been going the other way and saying, let's get out of this retirement business. This is not really our core competency. Moving into 2010, leadership turnover still is an issue. Technology and the cost of that is still an issue. But we now start to see a diversification of service lines, people wanting to age in their homes, age in place, home and community-based services, more sophisticated healthcare technology. You get a hip replaced, you're out of the hospital much faster today with less invasive injuries to heal. Maybe you can rehab at home now, where even 10 years ago that wasn't necessarily the case. So that has changed some of the demands in our industry. And then today, we would prioritize healthcare really at the top of the pyramid, which is why I'm going to talk more about it today. Leadership turnover, technology competition, still all there in the top. Financial pressures, however, dropping down as we see more of the, as I mentioned, the strong to strong. A lot of the really weak, small, single-site CCRCs that didn't have reserves, that didn't keep up, they've closed, they've been sold, they've gone to the for-profit world, they've been repurposed, but we're starting to weed out that level of care, if I can say it that way, in our industry, and have, I think, more of a focus on stronger, more financially performing assets out there. So there you go. Those are the whys. Did that answer your question, ma'am, about, yeah, some of the drivers? So let's talk about what some of the benefits are of consolidating or getting larger. I worked with for-profit hospitals for the first 12 years of my career, and when I came into this business, I thought, really? You can get a lot of efficiencies. I had a client that merged and had 5 hospitals in one market, put in a mobile MRI, got rid of radiology departments, and saved $1 million in one day, literally, knocked $1 million to the bottom line. But senior living, you got X amount of residents, you have to give them X amount of meals, you need X amount of housekeepers. Where are they going to get efficiencies from scale? But as we've broken it down, there are purchasing areas, standardizing a dietary program among 5 communities, menus, food purchasing, starts to save cost, lo and behold. Insurance, we have caring communities. I think you guys are part of caring communities. No, you're not. Caring communities liability insurance and casualty insurance was a provider formed cooperative to purchase insurance. We've now got some other kinds of insurance happening out there on Medicare Advantage and so forth, which I'll talk about. I think professional resources, the buying power for employees and labor is huge. So when I talk about labor, I'll get a little more into that, but creating career paths among 10 communities where you've got people who can get promoted into all different types of positions, and you can recruit across a much broader array of job positions, big advantage.
What about long-term insurance? Is that
Long-term insurance, as in long-term care insurance
Yeah.
for individual people? Yeah, I don't see any of our CCRCs in that business of offering long-term care insurance, and it's actually getting very hard to find. The insurance companies who do provide that have realized they haven't priced it well, and they're struggling.
Is that something, is that sort of a duplication of what health,
senior living? Senior living is long-term health care, separate policy necessary?
So the question is it necessary to have long-term care insurance if you're going to live in senior living?
Yeah.
And I would say, well, I'll tell you my personal story. May I do that?
Sure.
So my husband and I bought long-term care insurance 20 years ago. He's 85, I'm 59. He has dementia. And I said to him, I think we should move into a retirement community and get a life care contract. And one of my clients said, why would you pay for a life care type A contract when you have long-term care insurance? Well, when he moved into memory care, his long-term care insurance essentially covered my entire monthly fee. So I would have been able to live there for free, accumulate capital, and be in a position then if he ran out of long-term care insurance to have a lot of extra savings to help pay for that. Before he moved into memory care, I was able to use his long-term care insurance to bring CNAs into the house, to bring a nurse navigator into the house, to get his meds managed, to do all kinds of things that allowed me to continue working. And none of those things were covered by our CCRC contract. So for us, it was a huge advantage to have that long-term care insurance. But that's a very personal decision, obviously, not for everyone, but a type A contract is intended to act like long-term care insurance and give you the ability to not have an increase in your monthly fee as you go through the levels of care, maybe allow the two of you to live in 2 different levels of care for one fee. So it's I would say a really personal decision. Mike, do you want to add on to that discussion there? I think it's an important question.
I would say if somebody has an interest in wanting to know about long-term care insurance, we can have that conversation, we can talk about it. What Mary is describing is the economies of scale of the organization as a whole, not necessarily the individuals. So she's talking about the types of economies of scale that you get when you combine with another entity and walking through those. For those that might have a question about long-term care insurance and its relevance, please see me. More than happy to talk that through with folks.
Yes, ma'am.
I have a question of curiosity, really. And among the sponsorship consortia, how many have some original religious affiliation?
Very good
I know
question.
why Pennsylvania has leadership in CCRCs, the Kendall Corporation and other such
Quaker
organizations with Quaker base. But what's the proportion?
I should know this off the top of my head, and it's in a research report that we do. I believe that the religious affiliation is about 70% out there. And the leading denominations are the Lutherans, the Presbyterians, and I think the Methodists are the 3 biggest ones. You are United Church of Christ. We've got a number that are UCC. We have a much smaller portion that are fraternal, like Masonic or Foresters or the PEO Home or the Oddfellows, and then a small amount that are secular, not-for-profits. What's interesting to me, though, is that of the ones that have religious roots, many are moving away from that. So most of them would say, maybe 5 or 10% of our residents are from that denominational affiliation, but the trend has been to take the religious out of the names of communities, just like we're getting rid of the word homes and going to communities or vibrant living or those kinds of names.
That's what schools and colleges and others.
Schools and colleges are also doing that now. Any other questions? Okay, so we're seeing efficiencies. I'm sorry, yes, sir.
You said nothing about Social Security
Right.
and what's coming because of this diminishing amount of money. Has that been a thing that you people have been looking at?
Probably not a
Can you repeat the
topic
question?
for us here. The question was regarding what's happening with Social Security, what is it covering, what is it not covering. And that's a very important topic, and it's very relevant, and you've now given me a good idea of a topic we ought to have here, because that's going to pertain to everybody. What Mary is trying to communicate is more the institutional industry trends, what we're seeing organizationally, and not necessarily individual, either personal or things like Social Security. But that's a really good topic that I'd like to see us include.
Yeah, and I think that plays into, will baby boomers be able to afford to move into retirement communities? Are they saving enough for retirement? And we, from that perspective, we do look at the demographics and the income out there. So buying power, greater operational economies here that we see communities getting out of combining with others, collecting financial services, legal, bringing in-house legal in to save on outsourced legal issues, human resources systems, recruiting systems, being able to affiliate with other organizations that have services that you don't have. So we have sometimes folks who've got strong community-based services, transportation networks, that type of thing, joining in with others who are stronger on the independent living side. So lots of economies of scale there. Ability to attract employees I touched on already, and that's pretty huge. Fundraising capability for larger organizations, branding across a broad market. So Human Good, for example, which owns Judson Park down in Des Moines, very big on carrying that Human Good brand now across the country. They have an organization in Pennsylvania they've just affiliated with, 2 in California, communities in Arizona, Washington, Nevada, Idaho. So that Human Good brand, their goal is to have that really be known as high quality, customer-centered care and vibrant living. Attracting high quality board members. You've got a high quality board, but sometimes a larger organization, some of our clients are even doing professional paid boards now as they get bigger and bigger. And then I talked about accessing capital. When we have a diversified organization across lots of geographies, we see risk reduction coming just from the size. You still have to operate well and all of that, but just from the size, because we're so housing market vulnerable in independent living, there's a real advantage to strength in numbers there. So a number of different ways that we think about partnership, and some of the transactions that you saw can take all different kinds of forms. So it might just be coming together to do a project collaboratively in a market. You know, let's hold a farmer's market for seniors and let's partner with 2 or 3 other folks on First Hill and do that. Could be a whole change in management. Let's have somebody else come in and bring a new management contract. Let's have us go and manage the Hearthstone or something, and we're not taking any ownership change, but doing a management contract. We might do a joint venture and say, let's put 50% in and ask Transforming Age to put 50% in, and let's create a PACE center or a community day program for seniors on First Hill, and we'll do that together as a joint venture. We'll each own half of it. Or there can be actually changing sponsorship, as I mentioned earlier, and essentially taking over control and ownership of another organization, or even selling a portion of your assets. So I have some examples here that you could look at. We can get, I think, copies, Mike, to folks if they want to read that. So I'll just quickly touch, the Reutlinger is a Jewish community in the Bay Area that was heavy in skilled nursing, was deciding, gosh, do we try to raise the money to really backfill and become a CCRC and build independent living here, or do we look for somebody to partner with, because our future as a big nursing home isn't really very good right now. So they have ended up working to join forces. It's still in process, so we'll see if it has to get to closure, but to join forces with a company called Eschaton, which is a multi-site system. They have lots of different locations. Some are just assisted living, some are just skilled nursing, and only one is a CCRC. So there was a cultural fit there, not from a religious perspective, but a cultural fit from a skilled nursing focused healthcare model perspective. So I find this one super interesting because most of our Jewish communities are looking to partner with other Jewish communities, and tends to be a pretty, the one religious-based model or faith-based model that has very high occupancy in that particular particular religious affiliation, well, especially if it's a kosher dining program like Klein Gallon and the Summit. I mentioned Human Good earlier that has Judson Park, so there were 2 California organizations, APHOW and the B Group, came together with 18 CCRCs and about 60 affordable housing. They've now merged in with Presby's Inspired Life out of Pennsylvania, added 3 more CCRCs and 36 more affordable housing. So now we're looking at potentially a national system of CCRCs that really wants to work on, among other things, creating a middle market rental product for the seniors coming up that may not be able to afford to pay an entrance fee and move into a higher end retirement community. So that's a cool example, I think. Longhorn Village is a Texas university-based retirement community started by shoot, what's the name of the university? In Austin,
University of Texas.
the Texas X's,
University of Texas, UT.
I guess. Sorry, I'm just having a complete brain blip there. Alumni group, the Texas X's, started that organization and got to the point where it was a successful retirement community, but they said, wow, this is really not our core business. There's a whole lot to do here, to manage here. We'd be better off having somebody focused in this business come in and take over and let us continue with our licensing agreement and our tailgate parties and the things that we do to connect that community to the university. So Brazos Presbyterian, which has 2 other retirement communities in Texas, was the winning bidder there on that deal. All right, so I'm going to move on to the labor crisis here. We are looking at a lot of workforce issues, mainly because of the aging of the population. So we've got fewer and fewer people coming behind. We have passed a crossover point, and for the first time in our history, where there are more people over the age of 15 than under the age of 15. So we have not got the new children being born and the new young people coming in literally to take care of us as we are aging in this next generation. The statistic that I read that really brought it home to me was for every 8 jobs we're going to need to fill in senior living, we're only going to have 1 person to even look at as a candidate for that job. So we have to find ways to work smarter, get more done with fewer people. Technology will be one of those. This graph on the right is a survey of our CFO, Chief Financial Officer hotline, that just affirmed 80% of folks were worried about staff recruitment and retention, and 75 were worried about labor costs. Those were the 2 big issues at the top of their minds, and that we need to be focused on solutions for. So why are people not coming to work in our industry? We have a sexy problem, lack thereof. It's not the greatest attractive industry to come into to work with older folks. Minimum wage pressures, immigration policy, as President Trump has perpetuated his immigration policy, and I'm not making a political statement for any of you who are Trump fans at all, just to say that factually, as we limit immigration, we are limiting some of the workforce inflow, particularly CNAs. A lot of our CNAs are immigrants, Philippines, Mexico. I mean, I'm in Arizona, so we get a lot of workers coming across the border. That's really hurting our supply of workers. And as our industry is growing, of course, we're absorbing more workers into the space. And gosh, when McDonald's is offering $15 an hour and tuition reimbursement, that's a lot to keep up with compared to having to lift and turn people in a nursing home or toilet people, which are great needs that we have. Our job growth is outpacing a lot of the rest of the economy, so there's tons of opportunity. That's exciting. We'll need about 1.2 million employees by 2025, and as I mentioned, we're expecting to have about 1 person for every 8 jobs that we need to fill. So there's tremendous opportunity. I will say that I'm doing my part in the industry. My 23-year-old is now a life enrichment director at an assisted living community, and she is thrilled to be part of the aging services world and is going to get her master's in gerontology, and she just feels like this is the business to be in. I said, why do people your age not want to do it, Lily? And she said, well, I think they're afraid of death. I think they're afraid of facing death, and it's really scary to them to be in front of people who are moving toward the latter part of their lives. But she said, I think it is just cool. So I loved that. She said, it's also not very sexy, so, you know, I said, I agree with you, Mom, on that point. That's definitely part of it. Demand for jobs is mostly in the caregiver side, personal care aides, food prep workers. We are having some nursing shortage. So that's where the issues are. And look at, I tried to update these and I couldn't find updated median pay levels, but look at most of these jobs are under $25,000 a year. So it's tough to find quality folks and hold on to them and have incentives that make it work for them. Minimum wage, we're moving towards $16 an hour here depending on how large your business is. California, Portland, Colorado, New York, as I said, is paying $15 at McDonald's. I think Arizona is paying $12 at McDonald's. I started my career at McDonald's and left at $2 an hour, which I was thrilled with at the time. So that is a real issue. And when you think about wage compression too, so if a new employee comes in at 16 and they are working for someone who came in 3 years ago and has just worked their way up to 16 with 3 years of experience, well, now what do? You've got all of this compression, so you really need to start moving everybody up to have some kind of a reasonable tenure type situation. So that is real true cost, and I hope that you'll keep that in mind when rate increase time comes around. That I know your management's doing the very best they can, but they've got serious pressures, and that's definitely one of them. Just a quote from one of our chief operating officers at Human Good. He gave us this for our conference last year, and I thought it was really powerful. The ability to attract top talent will determine our future. Wow, that's a strong statement. We've also got labor shortage in construction. I had touched on that. So what are some of the things that are working in recruitment? Well, clearly communication as we cross the generations is a huge issue, so I just thought this was funny to put the little text up there. But we are seeing more and more online recruitment, even text interviews, if you can believe that. I've heard of companies that are interviewing people via text message with hourly workers, immediate access to pay. So my daughter calls me last night. She's 2 weeks into this new job, and she says, I got to go through all my benefits with you. And she starts reading me out things, and she says, and we have pay active, Mike. We have pay active, and I think I'm going to sign up for that. And I said, actually no pay active, Lily, so I can tell you a little bit more about that. So pay active is a technology company that you can contract with, and it allows your hourly workers to draw against their upcoming paycheck. So for $5, they can draw, I think, up to $500 against an upcoming paycheck. Pay active takes the risk that that employee actually works the time, works the hours, and you can have your pay active in your wallet at OnShift, which is another online human resources app that's getting some traction in the senior living industry. We have Arena, which is an artificial intelligence software that overlays on your human resource system, and as you hire people, it learns the backgrounds of the people who stay versus the backgrounds of the people who leave, and it starts to get smarter and smarter about who you need to be targeting to get employees that will stay as caregivers and perform well. So there are some cool tools out there that are really helping us be smarter on the human resources side, or helping providers like you all be smarter on the human resources side and better manage career path. We're also learning that these younger generations are not so much vertical ladder climbers like we are in my generation, and they think more about, am I learning something new? And I'm happier maybe moving laterally if I'm learning something, if I'm having a chance to use my talents, if I'm not being held back just because I'm younger. So I was at a conference with some millennials on a panel that we were talking about why are millennials not coming into the workforce, and this one young man said, you know, I'm better at technology than my boss and that other people who work around me, but no, they hold me back from doing things because I'm the new guy or the young guy. He said, how many of you saw me look at my phone yesterday during the meeting? And did anybody think I was being disrespectful looking at my phone? He said, actually, I was so excited about the book that was being talked about, I was on my phone ordering it, and it'll be at my house today. And then I was paying attention the whole time, and I was immediately engaged again. But he said, I would get judged in some circumstances because I had my phone out and I looked at it when it was actually a big compliment to the presenter. So we have to think a little bit differently about this workforce. My research is the Gen Z workforce, the youngest kids today, are going to be our most engaged workforce. That's what a lot of the marketing companies are telling us. And they're all about work that is meaningful in their lives. And that is not for profits, and that's working with seniors, and that's being in a place like this. So I'm excited that we have some opportunities out there, and we need our HR folks to be really thinking out of the box. So that's labor. I'm going to talk quickly about healthcare. It's about 5 minutes, so I just want to do a time check. Is Mike here?
Yeah, to step out.
Okay, so it's about 5 minutes till. I had us down to 10:30. Is that right, or no? Or was it 10 o'clock?
10:30. I reserved the room till 10:30. Whatever.
So just you're not. Keep going. Okay. All right. So healthcare. We are having, I think, one of the biggest sea changes in the healthcare industry that we have had since reimbursement in the early 90s changed at the hospitals from paying for every service you get to having those diagnostic codes. That really revamped reimbursement and Medicare dramatically. Well, we're in that kind of an environment again today. Skilled nursing occupancy has really fallen. It's in the low 80s nationally. The research I've done, 77% in Washington. Somebody told me they thought that was too low, but that's at least what Kaiser says. We've talked about the caregiver shortages. We have rural areas that can't really support nursing homes, that are struggling to make ends meet, but we've got some telehealth and other things that are kind of helping to fill that gap. We have Medicare Advantage, Medicare Managed Care. How many of you have a Medicare Advantage plan? A lot of you. So what in the old days, not so long ago, before we had Medicare Advantage, in your typical nursing home, you have long-term care people who were there just for the rest of their lives because they were too frail to really live in any other setting. You had your Medicare rehab, Medicare short stay people coming out of the hospital to rehab, and then we might have a few managed care people sprinkled in there. It was really Medicare that paid for everything else, right? The rest was kind of a losing proposition. Well, with Medicare Advantage now, the big juicy piece of reimbursement in skilled nursing is going away. And there really is very little profitability anywhere in the skilled nursing spectrum anymore for providers. Add to that most individuals would rather not be in a nursing home if they have a choice to be in some other setting, maybe to rehab that hip or that knee. We've got people moving away from that skilled nursing level of care, at least on the West Coast. We're not seeing it as much in the rest of the country yet, but I have a number of CCRCs that have shut down their skilled nursing units or repurposed them to high acuity assisted living, and others that are talking about doing that, new communities that are going up without it. So the two I mentioned in California, one under construction has no skilled, the Zen project, no skilled nursing. The last new community I financed in California in 2014 had no skilled nursing. So it's really seems to be a trend, at least in this part of the country, for the reasons that we're just touching on. A lot of nursing home closures, nearly 50 since the beginning of 2010. You can see a map there, which is a little bit dated now, but that shows, and I heard last night at dinner that we're approaching 20 nursing home closures in the state of Washington. 20. Even Good Samaritan, I mentioned earlier, who's been one of the biggest nursing home providers in the country, has now closed about 10 of their communities. So out of all of the nonprofit closures in the upper right corner there, about 70% of them were skilled nursing. Now we've had a few other things. We've had a couple CCRCs closed. We've had some other kinds of product, but predominantly it's skilled nursing, and a lot of those that are getting sold versus closed are going to the for-profit sector. And maybe that's a good thing for standalone skilled nursing. Maybe that's the way that we really make the business model work, is having a lot of communities in one area and being able to manage the reimbursement. As a component of a CCRC, on average across the country, skilled nursing comprises about 28%. In the old days, in the 50s, most communities were about 50% skilled nursing and about 50% independent living. We didn't have assisted living then, right? We didn't have memory care then. So it was much more of a medical model of retirement. Would you call Horizon House a medical model of retirement? No way, right? It's all about activity and health and wellness and going to concerts and doing fun stuff and enjoying your retirement. So skilled nursing has downsized along with that. An interesting thing that we're seeing on the Medicare Advantage side is some providers saying, okay, well, we know that we're going to stay in skilled nursing. We want to keep that as a business line. Let's become our own Medicare Advantage plan. And we've got one forming Christian Living Communities in Denver, Ohio Living, and Juniper Communities, which is a for-profit, coming together with a company that we invested in our one of our technology venture funds, Ally Align Health, and they're forming their own Medicare Advantage plan. So instead of losing part of the money to a Humana Medicare Advantage plan, and then Horizon House getting a chunk, or Ohio Living getting a smaller chunk, they can offer directly to their residents their own Medicare Advantage plan. So we'll see how that takes off as things like that begin to happen more across the country. And with the consolidation, again, you've got the economies to do some of this risk-taking. It is going into a different business. It is becoming an insurer, but Perennial Consortium, at least, is the first one we see really coming off the dime. Finally, I'll close with just a couple of thoughts on technology. In the past, as technology really began with email and internet, and then we started to have FaceTime, the ability to talk to the grandkids, and then we started to get things like this that could measure our heart rates, or Fitbits that could count our steps. We were all about measuring things. That was kind of the limit. Now technology is progressing toward, can we predict? Can we use technology to measure your gait and predict if you're likely to have a fall before you actually fall, so that we can maybe add years to your life because you don't break that hip or whatever it might be. So sensors in the shoes, robotic clothing, lots of neat things are happening in that arena. Smart home technology is becoming more common, so if you ever hear the term the Internet of Things, that means that lots of things like your refrigerator, your thermostat, your light fixtures, all of these things can be now connected to the internet. We have clients that are starting to use Alexa as the connection point, mostly to manage thermostats up and down and lights on and off. Those are the two big ones that right now that we see being installed in a lot of newer retirement communities or in refurbished retirement communities. But we have others that are doing it all. You can have your iPad and set your temperature, turn your lights on and off, make sure your refrigerator is operating properly. You can kind of do everything remotely from your iPad while you're out of town. And Mike and his team can say, boy, did she remember to leave her thermostat down instead of up at 80 degrees while she was on vacation for 2 weeks? Maybe let's just check on the iPad and we can fix that for her while she's away. So that's really neat stuff. Telemedicine I touched on earlier. So Medicare Advantage is now carving out money to pay for telemedicine. And as we have shortages of doctors and of nurses, using telehealth, so you actually roll in a screen, you can talk to a doctor, talk to a nurse. It's being used more for education on chronic diseases, monitoring vitals, doing consultations about different types of issues that you might be having, save you a trip to the doctor, maybe make different use of your medical clinic on site, and reach areas where we might not have to have quite as much residential care available. So we have a couple of white papers on telehealth that our expert in-house has published if anybody happens to be interested in that area. Finally, I think the most often used that I hear of, and what I happen to think is probably the most powerful game changer, is voice-activated technology. And as my generation and generations behind me age into retirement communities, my daughter doesn't know a world without cell phones and laptops and all of that. But I do know a world without that, so it's not as second nature to me as it is to her, and even less so to you all. But voice activation, everybody can do, right? So I've had amazing experience with voice activation with my husband, who's a huge music fan, lost his ability to really operate the buttons on a stereo system or turn on the phonograph. I went and bought him one so he could play his record albums. He just couldn't manage it. But then I got him an Alexa, and he went and got his record albums out of the cabinet, brought him in and said, "Alexa, play Rachmaninoff Symphony, blah, blah, blah." And I came home from work one day, he's standing there with the record album, and he looked at me and said, "I asked her to play this, and she's playing it." And I thought, wow, this was major quality of life improvement for him. And he's still in memory care every time I go, has Alexa going with something. I have a whole list of music printed out for him to read off of. Alexa, play. And I have all these artists, and I keep bringing more, redoing his little page for him. So we have some powerful, powerful stuff here that we're going to be able to implement in retirement communities, or you all are going to be able to implement, that I think will really change quality of life, particularly for people as you age and lose function. And a lot of integration of campus activities going on too, going online to make your restaurant reservations, going online to sign up for activities. So we try to get rid of the paper in all the mailboxes, which will be terrific. CareMerge is one of the companies we've backed in our venture capital fund, technology venture capital fund, that is trying to integrate across all of these areas. So they come in and bring a screen that you can tap into. They sit around the community, and you can look at the schedule, or you can make a dinner reservation or sign up for a fitness class or whatever it is that you want to do. And they're working to integrate that with wearable technologies, with other kinds of tools that your community may decide to invest in. Self-driving cars. So on the bottom right there, that's the CEO of Paradise Valley Estates in Northern California, Kevin Burke. They are implementing a fleet of self-driving cars on their campus. They are a big, not a high-rise like Horizon House, they're a big spread-out campus with lots of individual single-family homes all around the campus. So people need to get a fair distance to get to the restaurant or the common areas. So they have partnered with a company called Optimus to put a fleet of these cars in, and Optimus has said, "Boy, you're the perfect test site because it's a closed campus. We can geo-map this campus, get these cars learning the route." So they're manned for right now, but eventually they will be unmanned self-driving cars, and residents will be able to call them on their iPad. One of many ways to reduce labor force requirements. So a couple thoughts on what the proactive single communities like Horizon House are doing to be successful. And I think that your community is doing all of these things. Investing in your physical plant to be the community of tomorrow. Really committed to marketing and sales, to branding your community, to getting out there and telling the story to keep occupancy strong. Being very aware of your competitors and engaged with your competitors and how you can work together to remain successful. And I think it's really, the big competition is not Skyline or Mirabella. The big competition is getting people out of their homes to embrace the retirement community lifestyle. So I think all of you and your competitors share an agenda in that regard to make the industry as strong as it can be and to show as well as it can show. And you all tell the story to prospective residents better than anybody, showing your successes, successful aging, and your happiness here. Strong commitment to operations. So again, when rate increases come, I know those are hard times. I'm still living in a CCRC for a couple more weeks. Now that my husband is off campus elsewhere, I'm going to move out, but it's painful. But I knew all of the reasons why the costs were going up every year when I got my rate increase notice. So knowing that operations need to stay strong for you to do all of the things that you need to do for the future, and considering partnerships or collaborations where possible, or maybe even someday, who knows, considering a sponsorship transition with another community could be in the cards. And now you know a little bit more about reasons that might make sense for Horizon House. So with that, I will be glad to entertain any other questions. It's about 8 minutes after the hour, so until they drag me off with a crook, I'll stay here and talk to you. Yes, ma'am.
I have a slightly sinking feeling that we are being considered for merger with somebody else, which your list of advantages, of course, is very logical and I would imagine acceptable, but at the same time, what are the disadvantages? And one of my fears is that, yes, my investment, what is going to happen when I'm gone? What is going to happen also to the time that I'm still here if we are merged? So I'm impressed by what you have presented, but I would like also to see the disadvantages or be reassured that my life here is going to be reasonably secure.
Right. Well, that's a really, really important question, and I know Mike's not here to add on, but maybe Lori or others in management can help with this. What I would say to you is I think cultural fit is the biggest priority when we see organizations looking to come together. So usually for every management team, it's, are my residents going to continue to have the same type of experience they have today? Are all the things that are wonderful about, just using Horizon House as an example, are all the things that are wonderful about Horizon House going to be maintained for them? And then what is the financial deal? What are our reserves, capital reserves for our community protected, or are we financially joining forces to borrow together, to spend together across multiple locations? And that information usually is pretty transparent out there. It's hard, I think, as CCRC residents, it's hard to make the jump from this is my money that I paid in entrance fees to really this is the corporation's money that now they need to manage, and I'm entrusting them to be appropriate managers and have audited financials and to make good on all the promises in my contract. But I would encourage you to think of that your management team's got that responsibility to be good stewards of everything that all of you pay in, and to pay the expenses of the community and try to manage to a budget and to a profit margin that, because it's okay to have profit as a not-for-profit, we need to, right? We need to be a sustainable business as not-for-profits. So it's okay to do those things, but preserving the experience that you were promised, I would bet, is the highest priority of your team here. Can you add on to that?
I'll add to that. Thank you, Mary. When I went to the Leading Age State Conference back in June, Judson Park is down in Des Moines area, and they joined the Human Good group that Mary spoke about earlier. So I spoke to one of the senior staff at the conference because I was curious to understand, much to your point, Ina, what was that transition like? And what has been the experience from that transition from both a resident and staff perspective. And this staff member shared it had been a seamless transition, and from a staff and resident perspective, there's been very little change in the culture that they have been accustomed to. And what has changed is, of course, the name, Human Good, from what used to be the APHAL group, the Judson Park. But she shared from a cultural perspective that was the highest priority that both the staff and residents were expressing when conversations were taking place about that possible affiliation. And she felt from her experience and what she was hearing from residents is the culture very much has been preserved through that transition. Other questions? Yes.
Over here. Mary?
Yes.
This side.
Thanks. Oh, gotcha. Thank you.
You mentioned something in your early part of your talk. You talked about, well, we want to protect our refund. Well, most of us don't have a refund. Maybe there are some people that have been here long enough that they got in under an attractive refund, but I don't think of this as a refund place. We paid a large entrance fee, and after 4 years, it's gone. So I accept that we need to have continuing investment by management in keeping the place up and keeping the place competitive. But is there a difference between refund places and non-refund places? I mean, I guess from what I've heard about Skyline and maybe Marabella, they have pretty significant refund options. You mentioned you're moving out of your place. I would think it'd be not in my interest to move out of here with a significant entrance fee that I paid. I can imagine I'll only be here forever.
Right.
Can you talk about those differences?
I think you can hear me if I just
Nope.
talk. Yeah, I don't think there's a lot of difference in how communities are managed between with refundable versus non-refundable contracts. I had a choice. I could have paid a lower non-refundable entrance fee or a higher 80% refundable, and I knew I would move out at some point when my husband passed on. So I chose an 80% refundable, but I think most communities are managed to be financially strong for the duration, whether they're offering refundable contracts or non-refundable. Having a refundable, of course, gives you more of a vested interest, I guess, in the future financial viability, but you're aging into other levels of care potentially, and so still have an interest in the community staying strong over the long run for that reason, not just because there's a refund out there. So I don't think there's a big difference at all in how I see management teams behaving. Is that answering your question?
I think so.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
The trend towards profit, what will be the consequences of that? How will it affect the whole movement of retirement?
So the fact that not-for-profits are becoming a smaller portion of the product that's out there, I think means that we will be more of a rental model industry. We won't have as many of the entry fee communities, and in particular the entry fee communities with the life care promise. That's only about a third of what's out there now, and it's all nonprofits that do that, offer that kind of product. I just personally have a bias toward the not-for-profits, that there's so much good work being done and there's so much heart and caring in what's happening. But if you went to the Brookdale website, the word mission pops up about 15 times when they talk about their business, and their for-profit and their rental. So I think there are a lot of good places out there that are both not-for-profit and for-profit. I just personally would like to see our not-for-profit step up and grow and maintain their leadership in the market. A lot of the innovation too, I'll just say, creating the personal care type of accommodation that became assisted living, that really started with not-for-profits. Creating the memory care environment or the household model of care, those came out of the not-for-profit spaces, and with Bill Thomas innovating. So I think that we have, not-for-profits have brought a lot of leadership to the industry that I hope will continue. That's about the best way I can answer that question. Sorry, I got a bad knee. Let's sit down for a few minutes.
You have been very positive about Horizon House, which is an agreement with, I think, of just about everybody in here feels. But implicit in that, in your communication is, I feel, having in mind the independent living segment of Horizon House, which is the secret, it has a secret sauce, which is what Sarah used to call it. And it would seem to me that we have to extend that notion of a kind of a place we are to supported living and to the memory unit. Some of the things that you mentioned, the house plan, aging in place, involvement with the community, that there isn't the sort of like there's a door and it stops when you go into it, and you haven't said much about what happens in supported living. So we've become very interested, my wife and I, and a number of other people, led by Lori, in can we ameliorate the boundary conceptually, philosophically, so that the attraction to coming here is not that you're gonna or not get some money back, but that you're gonna have a meaningful life, whether as best you know it or in the way you know it, which will be different when you're in supported living and still more different when when you're in the memory unit than it is in independent living. But there will be some meaningfulness, and personhood is a popular word, and that we are in a unique position to be a model for that kind of place, because we're not going to get bigger. We can't. There's no real estate around here to buy. We may join other places, but we can pay attention to shifting changes in thinking about how we respond and care for, and the kinds and levels of care for supported living and advanced dementia people. Almost all of our supported living people are us in another time. And I wonder if you would, and I hope I'm making sense, and whether you would comment on that.
Well, I'd like to stand up and applaud you, because I think what you just said is so powerful, and it's really important. What I hear from my clients is a lot of folks, when they move in to communities like this, get very persnickety about, I don't want to see walkers in my dining room, I don't want to see scooters, I'm in the independent side, I don't want to be faced with the reality of where I might be someday, and the reality is that we're all going to be there someday. So I think embracing that is wonderful, and there's a lot that you as the residents can do to really bring down those barriers by going over to the assisted care component of the campus, and sitting with people and having programming and doing art and having classes. And the reason I'm moving out is memory care was horrible in our community for my husband, and everybody was parked in front of the television all day, and he was miserable. And now he's someplace that has all kinds of activities and enrichment, and is working much better for him. So my plan, unfortunately, as much as I know about this business, didn't work out well. So I think it's a wonderful sentiment to try to bring down those walls. I think the issue is what my daughter said to me. None of us want to face our deaths. You know, we don't want to face what's coming, and so it gets painful to look it in the face and say, I embrace you, and what can I do to make your life better today, friend?
Thank you very much.
I think we have time for maybe 1-2 more questions. All right.
Thank you for inviting me. I so enjoyed having time with all of you, and appreciate being here.
Thank you, Mary, for making the trip out. We really appreciate the information.
Even with coffee all over my shirt.
As my day began.